Good morning, everyone. My name is Cristina Ramirez. I am your HR Generalist Senior. In your recruitment section, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know as managers, you have other things to do besides being stuck in a training, but hopefully this training is worthwhile. Today's training is called How to Conduct Successful Interviews, and so I want to equip you with being able to be prepared to give applicants a successful interview. So before we get started, I want to share some funny clip art just so that we can bring some livelihood to this training. As you know, interviewing is not easy, and so the first one says, why should we hire you? Well, hello, because you have a job opening. The second one says, where I'm going is more important than where I've been, so I brought you my resume from 2014 to 2024. Basically, that candidate has listed everything in all those years and on one piece of paper. The third one says, my short-term goal is to bluff my way through this job interview. My long-term goal is to invent a time machine so I can come back and change everything I've said so far. Basically, making that interview go right the first time. So our learning objectives for today is I want to be able to help you conduct and provide an interview in a fair, transparent, and consistent manner using an interview checklist and also getting you prepared for your scheduled interviews. After these trainings, today is day one of a two-day training. We're going to be here for an hour each day. But after completing this training, you'll be able to identify the proper interview questions. We're gonna get challenged and you're gonna draft 6 appropriate interview questions. And then also after this training, you as a hiring manager will know that you can actually conduct a training, not a training, but an interview session for 30 minutes or less. Upon completion of the training, also you'll be able to make informed decisions, hiring decisions, and during this interview process. So those are some of our objectives and what we're going to focus on in these 2 days. So where does it all start? How is a vacancy created? And so there's several steps in a recruitment cycle, and the first one is a vacancy is created. Can someone tell me what happens? What would cause for a vacancy to be existent in an organization?
Retirement.
Good answer. Turnover. Either someone gets terminated or they voluntarily leave. What about if someone promotes? Then the person filling behind them that creates a vacancy, right?
Or a new department open.
Exactly. Great answer. And so of course, we'll have to post, we'll need to make an announcement out to the public and into our internals. We usually recommend 5 to 7 days. After it closes, we'll have the system review the applications to meet the minimum qualifications. Step 4 is where you'll come in. SME review is called subject matter expert because you're the experts that are hiring for your departments. So you'll review those applications one step further. And then step 5 is optional. You can actually administer an exam depending on the skill set that you're looking for in the candidate, or you can go straight to the interview process. For the purposes of today's training and tomorrow's training, we're gonna really focus on interviews. And the next steps, 7, 8, and 9, include what happens after the interview process. The background check, offer letter sent out, and then of course you start your new employee with your department. So what does the interview process look like? We want to be ready to know which candidates we're gonna interview. We want to have a checklist in place. What does the structure look like? We want to know who the panel is going to be. Here at the county, we like a structured process because you're asking the same questions to all the candidates that you're about to interview. We also recommend 2 to 3 people on your panel. You want to make sure that your panel is diverse. Either you have 2 males, 1 female, or 2 females and 1 male. You don't want to have the same gender, and the reason why is because we want to have diversity during that process. You wanna have different points of view. And then you wanna make sure you get your interview questions ready, your interview score sheet, and your scoring mechanisms. So what does the interview session what does it look like the day of your interviews? How long are you gonna do them? Best practice is to have a timed interview. You wanna have set a schedule in place where you have your candidates come in at a certain time. Believe it or not, you don't need a whole hour with a candidate. You can go up to 20, 25, the most 30 minutes. Typically, you wanna give yourself enough time to ask the question, which is usually 1 to 2 minutes per question by the time you ask the question and by the time they respond. You wanna give candidates timed warnings. We do have candidates that are long-winded and wanna take over the interview process. And so with that, you can let them know you've got 5 minutes before we need to close up this interview. You may ask, if I can go back one. You may ask, well, how many candidates need to be interviewed? Well, it depends. Best practice is to interview 6 to 8 candidates. And it also, again, it depends on the position. Are you filling an entry-level position? Are you looking for someone that's skilled, such as IT or public works department? Or are you filling a management or an executive position? It all depends on the position. But typically a good starting point is to interview 6 to 8 candidates. You also wanna think about what your interview environment is gonna look like. You wanna have a designated waiting area so that your candidate, when they walk in, they're welcome, they're gonna sit and wait, and then they're ready to be called into the conference room. Typically, the environment is a conference room. I know during COVID, we had to do virtual interviews, and so we do utilize Microsoft Teams to do interviews as well. But it all depends on how you wanna conduct. We're now reverting back to in-person interviews, and that's okay. What types of questions are you gonna ask? So typically on the day of your interview, you're gonna have a packet, an interview packet, and that you have that in front of you. For the purposes of today's trainings, you're gonna have a sample packet. And usually it'll include the schedule, the name of your candidates, your panel members, what position you're filling. You'll have some ground rules that HR has provided. You love HR, so we have some ground rules that we like to give our panel members just to help their interview process run smoother. Inside the packet, you'll usually have the job description for your reference. You'll have the candidate's application. And then, of course, what's important is your interview questions. So HR has a bank of questions that we can provide to you, but we're also gonna ask you for your input because only you know what your hiring department is looking for. So at the end of today's training, you're gonna have some homework where I'm gonna ask you to draft questions. But once those questions get drafted, they get placed into a template that looks like this. Typically, the most questions you wanna ask is 9 to 10 questions to give yourselves time to ask them and to give your candidate enough time to respond. You'll see that there's a space in between each question. That's if you wanna take notes. Questions should relate to the job and the applicant's qualifications. You also want to ask the same questions in the same consistent manner for each of the candidates coming in to be interviewed. Okay, on our next slide. So we're going to cover questions that you can ask. You want to have questions that are focused on the job, meaning what are the qualifications? What are the skills? What is the training? What is the education that is required for this position? You're gonna stick to those types of questions. You wanna avoid yes or no questions. And why would you wanna avoid a yes or no question? Can anyone answer?
It's not an answer.
Exactly. You're not getting enough information from the candidate. You're not getting what type of experience they may have from another job that it was a similar scenario. So you don't want to also ask guided questions such as teamwork is important to us. Tell us how you work well with others. Why? Because I'm already telling the candidate what I want to hear. Scenario type questions are good. You may have a problem that you recently experienced at work that you said, you know what, this would be a good question to put in an interview, as an interview question. Please describe a time when you faced a challenging situation and how you and your team solved it. That gets the candidate to thinking and making sure like, oh, I remember a scenario in my last job where we came together and somebody had an idea and we implemented it and it solved it. At least you get the candidate to think and provide your response. And the next slide is gonna be your interview question don'ts. So these are things that you wanna stay away from. You don't wanna ask candidates about their marital status, such as, are you married, are you divorced, are you widowed, do you have children, what's your national origin, what's your age, how old are you, what gender, what do you identify as, disability, religion, what do you practice? Because at the end of the day, these types of questions do not relate to the person's ability to perform the job. And so of course you want to stay away from these types of questions because also it can subject you to a lawsuit. And that's something we don't want to be in. Again, your interview form is going to be your question template. It's going to have, you want to give yourself enough space to take notes if you need to. Always be conscious that these notes are, your notes on these forms are subject to open records requests. So make sure that you are being objective in the notes that you're taking and only writing what the candidate is telling you. You'll have a scoring mechanism in place, which means each question has a ranking weight. It's usually the first question will have the heaviest weight because you're asking them to describe everything about themselves that's related to the position, such as work experience or education. So that one will usually be about 0 to 15 points. And so you as a panel member, when they give you the response, you get to score however you want within that range. If you want to give them 20 points, you can certainly do so. If they answer, not the greatest response, you can give them lower than that. The questions will total up to 100 points. And so in order for a candidate to pass your interview process, it has to be 70% or better. After you're done with your interviews, you put your scores in. You don't have to worry about adding them up. You just turn them back in to HR and HR will do the scoring. Why? We typically, best practice is you don't want to have a panel member adding the scores. And so the next thing that I want to show before we wrap up today's training is, before I challenge you to do your questions, is we're going to watch a quick video. And this is called the Millennial Job Interview. Because when you start to interview candidates,
green juices, detox juices, stop.
You'll have different types of candidates that you'll be interviewing. So this is just a funny take on an interview. To get past the
Starving yourself. All of those are now a thing of the past.
Amy, it says you are trained in technology. That's very good. Are you adept at Excel?
No.
PowerPoint?
No.
Publisher?
Not really.
Exactly in what area of technology are you proficient?
Snapchat, Pinterest, Instagram, Vine, Twitter. You know the big ones.
I'm surprised you didn't say Facebook.
That's for old people, like my parents. That's funny.
Well, Amy, when you're working for me, you have to have those kind of research skills because I'll send you things for you to comb through and get the answers and send them to me. So for that, you got to be really good at technology.
For stuff like that, no problem. I'll just ask Siri.
You'll just ask Siri?
You know, Siri tell me this, Siri find me that. We're all good getting you the answers.
Tell Siri I want you ready to go at 8 sharp each and every morning.
I don't understand
What don't you understand?
what you just said.
You don't understand be ready to go?
No. You said 8, right?
Yes.
8 like in the morning 8?
Yes, in the morning.
Yeah, that kind of doesn't work for me. Who gets up at 8?
I do.
I Skype with my French boyfriend in Paris until like 3 in the morning. I don't even get to Starbucks until like 10, where I order my grande chai tea latte, 3 pump skim milk, light water, 2% foam, extra hot but not too hot. So if it's okay, I work best in the morning at 10:45.
Wow. Amy, I don't think we're going to be a good fit.
Why are you so negative? I can sense your hostilities, and right now I am not feeling very safe. I've been here for over 5 minutes, and the only nice thing you have said to me was nice resume, which I typed all night for this meeting with you. You've given me no guidance, no validation, no encouragement, no supervision. Is there an HR director somewhere?
HR director?
Yes, I need to speak to someone. I may have to take off today as a mental health day.
Take the day off. Amy, look at me. You don't work here.
Are you firing me?
Okay, yes.
And so that is a funny take of the different types of candidates that you're gonna have coming into the workplace. But our next step is, before we wrap up, I'm gonna give you 10 to 20 minutes to work on 2 interview questions, and I'll be walking around and checking your questions. But let's close on what we've talked about today, of today's training day 1. We've talked about selecting applicants. We've talked about the interview structure, the panel selection, who your panel members are gonna be. We've talked about the different types of questions you can ask. We've talked about the interview score sheet, scoring mechanism in place on that score sheet, and the proper questions to ask, what you can and you can't ask. And so with that, we're gonna move on to your challenge, and then we'll close the day. But I wanna thank you for taking the time to be here today. Thank you.